Yeah, let's go. So thanks everyone for being here. My name is Ray. I'm a developer advocate for Google Cloud Platform, and I've been focusing a lot on Java. That's because that's where I came from. I'm a Java developer for the past 15 years or so, and I started a project with the engineering team here at Google, and the project is called Spring Cloud GCP. And this project allows you to be able to use some of the Google Cloud services really, really easily with Spring Boot. But today we're not going to, see like the details of what this does, right? Because we have other talks for that. But what we are trying to do today is to show you how this is actually being made. How can you actually potentially extend Spring Boot and being able to adapt different extension points and potentially enhance its capabilities for other platforms and other services that you may have. Maybe something in your own company. If you have any questions, you can find me on Twitter, which is Sanadism. I'm super, super lucky today that Eddú is joining us also. Eddú?
Hola a todos. Hi everyone, my name is Eddú, and I am a software engineer at Nubank, also an open source contributor, and some of the projects I have been working on are Spring Boot and Spring Cloud GCP. I am also the author of my practice Spring Boot Starter. I am very glad to share the experience to build your own configuration with you, Ray. And you can find me on Twitter at Eddú Meléndez.
Awesome. Yeah, and Eddú has not only contributed to many different open source projects, but also Spring Cloud GCP as well. And just last night when we were rehearsing, I had to ask Eddú a lot of questions for a project I was working on that had to do with Spring Cloud GCP and GCP services. So that was incredible. And so thank you so much, Eddú, for joining us and sharing your knowledge and wisdom here.
My pleasure, Ray.
Okay, so let me start out with a small story. In 2017, Google Cloud released Cloud Spanner to GA. And Cloud Spanner is a globally distributed, horizontally scalable, strongly consistent relational database. Okay, some of these words don't usually go together because when you think about horizontally scalable or globally available, you probably think about something like a NoSQL, but then that's eventually consistent. But Cloud Spanner has all features that you need. So when GA 2 years ago, it had the client library. However, as a Java developer, I was really looking for a read-write JDBC driver. Maybe for ORM, I can use Hibernate Dialect or Spring Data, especially Spring Data if I want to interact with this database idiomatically. But none of those things were there back in 2017. And I do miss quite a bit of just some object mapping, right? It doesn't have to be too complex, but I need at least some POJO to table kind of marshalling so that this whole process becomes a little easier. And I happened to be in Chicago, and I was meeting Josh Long, and I asked Josh, hey, how hard would it be to write a Spring Data for Spanner? And Josh, I remember this very vividly. It was in the evening. Josh said, well, depends on how deep the rabbit hole might go, and you might not sleep tonight, okay? And that's what I did. I didn't sleep that night. And I made a little proof of concept for Spring Data for Spanner. And it uses the client library behind the scenes, but I can write the code like this. Okay, so with Spring Data, I can write idiomatic code to access a database that uses the standard repositories, right? So I can use CRUD repository, paging and sorting repository, and this code looks like something you might do and use and write with other data stores, right? So like whether it's like Mongo or JPA with Hibernate behind the scenes, it's pretty similar in terms of this concept. And so I did that in 2017.
Hey, Ray, I remember this. Guess what? I was there at Spring Days Chicago in 2017 too, and it has been 3 years since then because that conference was in May. And there are proof for that.
Yeah. This is the photo that you took, right? Or other folks have taken. And back then, we didn't really know each other. But it's pretty amazing that after 3 years, I'm so happy to be able to do a joint talk with you. Cool. So now we have Spring Cloud GCP, right? So the proof of concept for Spring Data Spanner evolved into this whole entire GCP starters for Spring Boot. So now you can integrate with about 14 different services idiomatically, okay? But today, we're going to talk a little bit about the magic behind the scenes, right? Because the magic allows you to do something like this, where you can write an idiomatic Spring Boot application, right? It looks and feels just like a regular application with a repository with a data POJO, and you can map it to the table. But this application can be automatically enhanced with a health checkpoint with the Actuator Starter, right? It can actually talk to Cloud Spanner or any of the cloud data stores behind the scenes with a RESTful service by just annotating a repository. It can have paging sorting. It can send the metrics to cloud monitoring and centralized logging with cloud logging. And if you add Spring Cloud Sleuth for distributed tracing, this trace can also go to Cloud Trace, which is behind the scenes. And the code here remains the same because all we do is to automatically configure and enhance your application with additional features, okay? And so these capabilities are usually called the starters. When you add it to your application, you usually add a starter dependency. But more specifically, these are auto configurations that happens behind the scenes to help you to adopt these features with convention over configuration. So today, we're going to look at a little bit of the secret behind the scenes. And to do this, we're just going to create a new one, okay? So the starter that we're going to create is going to help us, for example, enhance our application so we can automatically configure a translation API for us, and so that we can have translation capabilities. Okay, this is a very simple starter that we're going to try to make, but it will show you most of the techniques that it would take to extend a Spring Boot application with a starter. So with that, I'm going to ask Eddú for the help here to walk through all the steps that we might actually need. Okay, so Eddú, what is your first suggestion here? Because I know that for JDBC and others, I see a lot of things where I just automatically get a template that I can use, right? So like for JDBC, we can use a JDBC template. For Mongo, there's a Mongo template. For Translate, what do you think we should do first?
Okay, first of all, we need the dependencies in order to start with our project. So the dependency that we are going to add first is the Spring Boot Starter.
Okay.
And we should add it. We should add it in the Translate auto configurer, and it should be optional because we don't have to bring the whole transitive dependencies that this dependency provides. So since we are working on our own auto configuration for the Translate API for Google, we need the client library. So in this case, I think we have one for that, right?
Yeah. So let me see if I can find it, the Google Cloud Translate API. And yeah, so there it is. And should this also be optional as well?
Yes, it should be optional because the auto configure module, it should be provide just the auto configuration for a lot of things. In our example, it's just for the translation API. But you can see in many other projects like Spring Boot or Spring Cloud GCP, auto configuration for many projects. So we will talk about the starters later, so we can continue.
Got it. Yeah, so the first thing that we do is to create an auto configuration, and the starter will come after. So let's focus on the auto configuration here. Now, how do I auto configure this? Because usually there's a template that we might be able to use, right? And the template is something that we might add to provide some wrapping around a raw API, right? So for example, a JDBC template, it will call JDBC driver behind the scenes, and Mongo template was Mongo driver behind the scenes. So for us, I think it makes sense to have a translated template, right? To wrap some of the raw API behind the scenes too.
Yes, it makes sense to provide this template since, for example, I am not very familiar with the raw API. So I will be more comfortable to use the translate template in this case.
Yeah, and usually the template API is also more idiomatic to the Spring ecosystem. So the surface of the template usually will use some API objects that's coming from Spring or something that's more standard, as opposed to a vendor-specific library, right? Usually that's the case. So here I have Translate API, and I'm just gonna go ahead and implement it with the implemented template. So I'm going to create a new translate template implementation. Okay. And so here, what I need is I need to actually use the raw API here. So I need to get, for example, the translation service client. Now, this happened to us yesterday, and we never really quite figure out why this Python library doesn't show up. There we go. Okay, so now I can import it, yeah. And now we can add it to my constructor, so later we can potentially inject it, okay? And then for this template, what I'm going to do is just to code the raw API behind the scenes. And the real reason is because the raw API, it can actually be quite complicated. So like this one, we need to add the content, which is the text. We need to add set the source language code. By the way, it's a translation, so we can translate from the source language to the target language, thing like that. And that's pretty much it. And then we can get response back, and we can also wrap this response in a easier to understand way. So we're going to get back the translated text, and that's pretty much it. Okay. But now, how does this actually automatically appear in my application? Because if I'm using JDBC Starter, a JDBC template is automatically injectable, right? How do I do that here?
Okay, now let's talk about the auto configuration. So in order to provide that, we need to configure some beans first. An auto configuration class looks like just a simple configuration. So we can create and translate auto configuration.
Okay.
Annotate it with configuration annotation, and create the beans for our implementation. In this case, for the translate service client and the translate template API, because people who is going to use our library, it will need the template in order to avoid the raw client. And those should be provided as a bean too.
Yeah. So let me make this real quick. So here I'm creating the translate template info, and I'm going to give back the client here too, so I can create these objects. And like you said, these are just beans. That's really cool. So you might be asking, hold on a second, this is what I do in my own application, right? In your own application, you might write your own configuration exactly the same way. So why is this auto configuration different? How does the template actually just automatically appear in my application, right? Because if I just added this jar as is, I don't think Spring Boot will find my configuration.
Yeah, that's sure, and I love about it. So we need one additional step in order to let know Spring Boot about this auto configuration. We need to register this class into the spring.factories file, which is located at the meta folder.
So 1 second, let me see what that is. So I need to create a new directory here for my resources. And then I'm going to create a new file called meta.inf. It's called spring.factories, right? Spring.factories.
Yes.
Okay. And so what does this do, and why is this important?
Spring, at the time that our application starts, we need to let Spring Boot know about the whole configuration that is in the class path. So in this case, we need to register our own into the enable auto configuration using the enable auto configuration key. So Spring Boot is going to recognize our auto configuration, and it will provide the beans for us.
I see. So every auto configuration jars that you ever include all have the Spring.factory. And this is almost like a service loader, but they read this file from auto jars, and then they figure out which auto configuration classes to load, and then my configuration will be kicked in. That's pretty cool. Nice. Now, what should I do more about this configuration?
Okay, I think we can provide some external configuration through properties, system environment variables. So what do you think about working on it right now? So we can configure the project ID, because I think we need the project ID somewhere, right?
Yes, you're absolutely right. So for example, in this call right here for the API call, we need some additional properties and or values. So for example, I actually need to set what we call the parent so that we can specify the GCP project that we want to use for this translation task. So here I need a project ID somehow. But how do I get that in here to configure my starter?
Okay, let's use configuration properties for that. So what configuration properties does is, but let's first create the class, translate configuration properties.
Okay.
And let's add the annotation configuration properties with the right prefix. And what that annotation does is, using the prefix, is group the whole properties for that pollo into that key. So we can, in our application properties, we can use the translate.project ID. And also, thanks to the IDE support, we can get some autocomplete.
Got it.
So now let's use it in our auto configuration. And in order to do that, we need to add one annotation, enable configuration properties, providing the right class. And now our translate properties will be able to inject, we will be able to inject that bin in the other way.
So here we can automatically inject this, and Spring will take the property file with the YAML file and automatically marshal it into translate property given the right prefix. And now I can use this property in my client. And let me just go ahead and inject this as well. So I'm going to say, here we have translation properties. Okay, and now I can get properties.get project ID. Perfect. That's pretty cool.
Nice.
Okay, so now this is almost ready to go, right? So I have my auto configuration. I am reading some configuration from the configuration properties. I got my bins, and I have Spring.factory. And if I include it in my other application, this will most definitely work. But I think we're still missing a few things.
Yeah, I think we can improve our auto configuration. We can add some validations, because when we are sharing this project, maybe people can forget to provide the right classes for that. So we can use conditional on annotations, which will help us to spin up, to choose if we should spin up or not the auto configuration. In this case, in order to work with the class path and validate if some classes are there or not, we can use the conditional on class. So we need a conditional on class for the translate service client. And I think, what do you think about turn off or turn on the auto configuration?
Okay. So for example, like something you can use to enable it or disable it, right? Because sometimes if you have a starter that's in the class path, but you don't really want to use it because you're testing, then maybe you disable it. How would I do that?
There is another annotation for that, and you can use the configuration conditional on configuration property annotation, and you will provide the prefix and the value. In this case, we can create a new property on the fly, and we can say that if it's missing, the configuration will spin up, and it also have the value, the true value.
Got it. So by adding this, what we can do is to, even if this auto configuration is in a class path and we have other classes, we have an option to actually disable it. So this translate.enable, if it's not there, not sure if it's missing, then will the condition will be met, and so it will be true. But if you do set a value to false, then it doesn't have the value true anymore. Then this auto configuration will be disabled completely. Nice. What about these bins? Because sometimes I want to override what the auto configuration provides me, right? So for example, in Spring Cloud GCP, if I don't like the default configuration because it's convention over configuration, if I don't like the default convention, I want to override it. How do I deal with this in this case?
Yeah, our auto configuration is very opinionated. So if someone wants to override in order to avoid the clash between bins, we can add an additional validation for that. And we will use the conditional on missing bin annotation, which will scan the context, looking for that specific class. So if it's not already created, then it will take hours.
Yeah, got it. So if you don't have this when you're writing a starter, then the users cannot actually override this translate template. So they cannot customize it further. What you end up with is multiple translate template bins, and now your application may have the issue picking which one to use. So this is also really nice to have. Okay. I think we're almost ready to test this, right? Is there anything else that we should be looking at before we try this out?
We should work on the Translator Starter.
The Translate Starter. Oh, that's right. Because here we are only having a auto configuration, and the auto configuration is something that will automatically detect what is in your application, what is in your class path, and automatically configure your app, right? For that reason, our dependency is all optional. So if I were to include this auto configuration right now, I have to figure out all the dependencies I need to add. So what is a starter, and how does that look like?
Okay, in a Spring Boot project, we have many starters in order to spin up JPA, MongoDB, Neo4j, for example. What the starter does is provide the right depth in order to spin up one auto configuration. In our case, we are only working with one of them, which is the translate auto configuration. So we will need to provide the right dependency for it. In this case, the Google Cloud Translate dependency. And the auto configuration for sure.
And the auto configuration itself as well. Okay, so here we go. So we have the auto configuration. So now if somebody includes the starter, what's gonna happen is that we will have the auto configuration, the class, and the Spring Cloud factory. And we'll also have the right classes in the class path. And now if I include the starter as a dependency, I will have everything I need to have this translate API template automatically appear in my application. Is that right?
Yes.
Cool. So should we go ahead and give it a try?
For sure.
Yeah, I'm a little scared. So, I mean, we literally just coded this up. So we're going to see if this actually works. So here I'm gonna go ahead and come to a simple app I already created. Let's see here. So this is the demo translate. And this doesn't have any capabilities right now. So we're just going to add the starter that we just created, right? So here we're going to add the com.example, and we have the translate starter, and the version is 0.0 snapshot. Okay, very cool. So let's give it a try. But before I can actually use it, I need to do a clean install. Because this is physically two different Maven projects, so I do need the jar file in the repository somewhere. Okay, so that should be enough. And then if I come back to my application here, now I should be able to write a little application runner. So I'm going to say application runner, return a application runners here. Okay, and then now I should be able to inject the translate template. There we go. So we do have this template. And now I should be able to say template.translate. And first I'm going to say hello, because we're speaking with Spring.io, which usually takes place in Barcelona. I'm going to translate it to Spanish. Okay. Now, remember, we also need to configure the project ID. So here, usually we have something really nice like Spring, whatever, this auto completion shows up if your IDE supports it. So for translate, hey, Eddú, what is going on here? I don't see our properties here. There's no auto completion here.
Okay, I think we missed something. Did we add the configuration processor dependency? I think we missed it.
What is that?
Okay, in order to the IDE provide our own auto-completion for the projects that we have created, we need to add this dependency to create that metadata file for us.
I see. And so the metadata file is something like this. It lives in the meta.inf. So in order to get our auto configuration, we need a JSON file that actually has all the properties in there. And every property is listed, and all the type it maps to is listed, and which class it belongs to is also listed. And we don't have that right now. So we need to add an annotation processor, which can be added as a dependency here, and again, as an optional dependency. So let me go ahead and try that out. So I'm gonna go back to my auto configuration, which is here. I'm gonna add the annotation processor that will automatically generate this JSON file for me so that I can get this nice auto completion. Okay? And if I go ahead and see it in my translate auto configurer in the classes, I should be able to find the JSON file, which is right here. Okay, so once you add the auto configure, once you add the annotation processor, then the file will be automatically generated, and now I should be able to do the nice mappings. So if I come back to my application, let me see if I can find it. Assuming this ID already loaded the new jar, there it is. So now I can see translate.project ID. Now I feel a lot better when trying to work with this starter, because now I can see all the configuration values I can use, and it also allows you to click into it, right? So for example, here I can click into the property, I can see the source file, and I can see the Java docs for it. Super neat. Okay, so do you think we're ready to test this out? We literally just wrote it in the past 10 minutes. I'm a little scared. What do you think?
I think we should give a try.
You think we should? All right. Yeah, I think we should too, because a demo is not complete until everything's working. So let's go ahead and try it. Now, I do always make this mistake. We need to make sure the runner is a thing. And now we should be able to run this thing. And let's see. We'll find out pretty soon. You know, this is only live on live stream, and who knows what's going to happen. And oh, you know what?
Yeah, the system will print.
Rookie mistake, yeah. Yeah, if you want to show something, you probably want to print it out somewhere or use a logger. So here we go. Let's try this again. Okay, so now we're printing out the translated text, and look at that. I can see it right here. So we are able to create a template. We're able to create an auto configuration, and it automatically uses convention over configuration to create a template for me that I can readily use. And then also properties I can configure in application.properties. Nice. And that is super awesome. Thank you, Eddú, for walking us through this process. This is a process I had to learn also, and it wasn't exactly straightforward, but hopefully this is going to be useful for all of you. So I'm going to go back to the slides real quick and just talk about like why this matters and how else can you use this, right? So for example, we created something that just created one thing that people can use in their application. But in Spring Data, the process is exactly the same, except you have to create beans that overrides some of the Spring Data expectations, right? So in this case, for Spring Data Spanner, I actually had to create many beans through the auto configuration mechanism and the starter mechanism, so that I am creating a registrar, I'm creating a mapping context, I'm creating a spanner template, and many, many other things. And so many different Spring Boot components have different ways to extend it, right? Just like how we allow you to extend our starter by using conditional on missing bean to override the default configurations, Spring Boot also allows you to do the same thing, or you can add more beans if you need to. So for example, for the ability to refer to a property, like using add value, right? Usually you think that the properties you refer to are always in the properties file, right? But we know that you can also store these properties in a remote location like Spring Cloud config server. But what if we want to do more? What if we want to store it in our secret management service? In which case, we need to be able to read the value you are trying to access, right? The key you are trying to access, and then load the data for you. And to do that, we can actually produce a bean called property source. And behind the scenes, we can just extend this functionality. And also, we're just using the same ability that we just showed you, where we're auto-configuring the application and just producing a property source automatically. Similarly, for Spring integration and Spring Cloud Streams, you can produce like some other things like via their binder and channel adapters API, right? And for Spring Data, you can extend a bunch of things so that now you can actually hook into this whole ecosystem and create your own object mapping to your own data stores.
And just like the other extensions, in order to provide logs for the Stackdriver login service, Spring Cloud GCP extends the logback appender. And for tracing information, Spring Cloud GCP extends Zipkin sender. And if we want to provide metrics from our application to another service, we can use Micrometer and the registry extension for that.
Yeah. And all of these things are done by exactly the same mechanism that we just showed you. If you go to the Spring Cloud GCP project, you can see that there is an auto configure module that has all the auto configurations. And then we have a number of starters. And all they do is to produce these things in the right way so that you don't have to worry about it in your own application. And now we have over about 14 different integrations. We have integration with our secret manager, so you can store your configuration securely, the passwords and everything securely in secret manager, and you can load it via the property source. For PubSub, we have integration with Spring integration, CloudStream, and Dataflow, and tons of Spring Data integration here with different databases in the backend. And also for ops, right? Trace metrics and logging, so that you don't have to worry about it yourself. And this is how we created all of our starters. Now, one of the things that really interested me was how do you actually test against the resources in the cloud? Because this is what I had to troubleshoot yesterday with Eddú. So Eddú knows a whole lot more about this. So Eddú will show some of the tips and tricks here.
Yeah, sure. As a developers, we will like to try new things. So for example, if we want to integrate with Datastore, Firestore, PubSub, or Spanner, the G Cloud SDK currently provide an emulator for those. So we had those available in the G Cloud SDK. Spanner is the new one, just was released like 2 weeks ago. So we can use it. And in order to test against those services, Spring Cloud GCP provides some nice things. Like for example, currently there is a auto configuration emulator for Datastore, and something that is coming in the next versions is the Firestore and the Spanner auto configuration. And there is one work in progress which provides JUnit rules in order to spin up those emulators, at least for PubSub or Spanner emulator. You can look into that pull request. And also cool. There is will allow us to do it manually.
Yeah. So a quick recap on this one. So for example, you see the property here, emulated.enabled. Now you can think back on how this is actually implemented, right? This is actually a conditional on property, which we showed. And this lives in an emulator auto configuration class, which is only active if the classes are there, and also if this enabled is set to true, right? And that is pretty awesome.
It is indeed. And there is also something that I think we have been working. It's using test containers. So we already have those emulators. So we can use test containers in order to provide those in our test. So if you want to take a look at that file, looks like this. And we are using the generic container, as you can see, which will, in this case, will download the Spanner emulator, and I will be activating the Spanner emulator auto configuration in order to work against the Spanner. So for now, it looks like this, but I think we are working to do it better, right?
Yeah, super cool. Yeah, and I know Eddú has spent a lot of time on test containers and helping us with the whole testing locally capabilities as well. So thank you so much for doing that, Eddú. So now, before we end, right? Just remember that we started off with Cloud Spanner that was a little bit difficult to use for me personally because I needed ORM and everything else. And now we have a fully open source JDBC driver. We have Hibernate Dialect. We got Spring Data. We also have emulator, so you can test your stuff locally. Now, Eddú, I know you learning about the starters and everything was really awesome for yourself. Can you share a little story with the audience here about why is this important and how did this help you?
Of course. Well, some of the contributions that I made has been based on the auto configuration in Spring Boot project. And there was also one contribution for my Batis project, in which I submitted just like another pull request. And talking with the maintainers, we decided to move to another organization, and that was the my Batis organization, to the official one. So all this knowledge that we have been sharing in this talk is basically applied on those learnings. And now people can write their own configurations, auto configurations for internal projects, or can take this knowledge in order to contribute to open source.
Yeah, yeah. And that's, I think that's really the takeaway here, right? You want to simplify your own workflow, but if you can, also use it as a way to help contribute to open source and, help other services to create these starters so that it's easy to use as well. So I think that's all the time that we have. Here's a couple of links that you can go. Lots of information on Spring Cloud GCP itself and my Batis starter. And if you want to learn more, you can always reach us on Twitter at Sanizim at Eddú Meléndez. Okay, so thank you so much for being here, and thank you, Eddú, for joining this session. I really enjoyed it.
Okay, well, thank you very much to you both. It was really insightful as well. So I think that we don't have time for questions, but maybe you can join the conversation on Discord. All right, so thank you very much. And we'll be back with the last session in about 10 minutes, so almost at the end. Right, so it has gone pretty fast. Right, so thank you all, and I'll see you in 10 minutes.